Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Flieger, and this is Unordained. And we have Catherine, who is the creator of Unordained. She is an ex-evangelical minister, and she's now an atheist. Hi,
Hi,
Catherine.
Ashley.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really good today. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
I think this should be fun, hey?
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
And we also have Dwayne, who is also an ex-evangelical minister, now an atheist. How are you doing, Dwayne?
Hello, I'm
Hey, Dwayne.
fantastic. Don't you know that by now? I'm always wonderful.
Good, good.
Nice to see
And
you,
so
Dwayne. I haven't seen you for a while.
I know, I feel like we haven't talked in forever.
I've been hiding backstage, for the last week or two,
Oh,
preparing
that's
everything
true.
I
You have been
can to find
commenting.
out about Kirt.
Yeah. So all three of us, we are hosts here for Unordained, and then Kirt as well, who we are going to be talking about tonight. It will be his deconversion story about how he got into ministry and how he got out of ministry.
Hi, Kirt.
Hey, everybody.
Hello,
Hey,
Kirt.
how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I want to thank you in advance for this free hour plus of therapy. Usually have to pay top dollar for that service. And
That's great.
I was a certified pastoral counselor, Kirt. I'll give you a bill.
oh boy.
Welcome to This Is Your Life.
Yeah. Great.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to this for a long period of time. I've really enjoyed hearing the stories of others so far and more to come. And, I'm just glad to share about mine and hoping that it will encourage someone out there in theirs.
Good. Yeah, I think it will. So, first question I have real quick is, what denomination were you a part of?
So, as is common, maybe with people in more of the Protestant evangelical world, I tended to be a little bit of a denominational nut. I grew up in, I would say I spent the majority of my life both growing up as a child and then in vocational ministry in Baptist churches or churches that had a pretty strong kind of Baptist theology that as their primary kind of framework for understanding. But I've been a part of mainly American Baptist churches, even like growing up, and then I was on staff at one for a number of years. Christian and Missionary Alliance Church, not for about almost 6 years or so, and also a non-denominational kind of what I would call a Baptist-costal or kind of a Baptist charismatic. Non-denominational independent church for a number of years when I was a youth pastor at that one. And then, so it kind of gives you an idea. It's a little bit of everything, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your early years were like, or how you got into religion?
Well, I think this is where I kind of, and I shared just briefly about this the first time when we had one of our first podcast where we introduced all the different folks who are a part of this, that I felt like I almost couldn't really start my story without telling a little bit of my parents' story. Because I'm somebody who was, born into the faith, as it were, born into the church. And so I thought maybe I'd first just say kind of really briefly, my parents both passed away, Jim and Lori Lewis. They came from very different backgrounds as far as in the Christian Protestant spectrum. My mom grew up in a General Association of Regular Baptists. Most people aren't familiar with that anymore. She was born in 1941, same as my dad, and was, which is highly fundamentalist. Very, it was like no dancing, no movies, no chewing gum, no, whatever. But I don't know.
Oh, wow.
The whole, no playing cards, any of those kind of things. It was very, dress was very, very modest, especially for women.
Yeah.
I remember the story. I remember my mom telling me once the story of the first job she ever landed, which was to be was a waitress at a drive-in restaurant, and she was, one of the girls was going to ride up in their roller skates and all that stuff and take your order. And she came back with her uniform that she was going to wear, which probably was like a skirt down to the knees at that point, or maybe a little bit past the knees. And my grandfather, her father, just took one look and said, "You're not working there. You're not. Just go give them the uniform." So
he thought that was provocative.
Yeah, that was just too much. So
wow.
So I'm coming from this background. Meanwhile, my dad comes from more of a Methodist background, and so I remember another story that they told me that I think kind of gives you an idea of the different backgrounds that they were coming from. Was when my dad asked my mom out to go see a movie. And the movie I remember was My Fair Lady, the music. So, but my mom at the time was shocked that, it was almost like inviting her to go into the devil's lair and see. So you have these two things. The reason why I mention this is kind of a premise is that if you're familiar with kind of the American church history, you have fundamentalism, which is the reaction to the liberalization of a lot of the main institutions that used to train people in ministry, your Ivy League schools and so forth, that were known as bastions of Orthodox Christianity. But then they were introduced to a lot of German higher criticism of the Bible, and that kind of cascaded. And so they shifted to a much less, say, favorable view of the Bible, more of a sociological view of the Bible. And so the reaction was fundamentalism. It was like, no, it's the Bible, it's the Word of God, inerrant, and all these institutions, they're becoming, liberal heretics, and we need to stay true to the gospel. So you have my mom coming from kind of that background. You have my dad coming from more of the mainline church background. You put those two together, and you have what, in essence, was what developed in the church in America in the 19th century in particular, was evangelicalism as a more identifiable movement or tradition, which is like, we're still fundamental, we're still strong on these things, but we're trying to move a little bit more towards a little softer edge, as it were, than maybe the more fundamentalistic background. So that's why you take a Methodist and you take a General Association of Regular Baptists, you put them together, you get an evangelical, and then they have babies, and you have me. So that's the world that I just was born into. Born on Saturday and church on Sunday, as an old Brian Duncan song that I used to listen to way back in the day used to sing. And so I grew up in an environment that had a lot of those evangelical hallmarks. So what do I remember about that? I remember that the Bible was truly holy. It was the Holy Bible. I remember that much. I remember how central Jesus was, even as a child, that Jesus was everything, and Jesus died for me. Like, even as a youngest child. So you all might remember that the first time when we were on, I showed this picture of when I got baptized, and I'm not, whatever. I'm that little kid way off on the side, and my dad and a Pastor Jim, was there. And I remember that because I was so young, the pastor said, well, why don't you come in? I'd like for you to share, because a lot of pastors won't baptize at that young of an age, because they're just like, it's too young.
Okay.
And at least in my tradition, where I grew up, there was some of that. So I came in, and what I remember my parents telling me is, he asked me, why do you want to be baptized? And I just said, Jesus loved me enough to die for me, and I just want to love him back. So,
say you were, Kirt?
I'm 7.
Wow.
Oh, you were 7 years old.
7.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
I'm the age of my youngest daughter, and I have this sense that of sin, that I was bad enough
wow.
that somebody, in this case, what I'm being told and I'm trying to understand at that young of an age, is God, come to earth. But he's perfect, a perfect human being, had to suffer this horrible, horrible, torturous death in order to save me and everybody else, because we're so sinful. So I think
Wow.
that's something that it's some of these hallmarks. It was like how important evangelism was, the Bible, righteousness, that you can't trust yourself, like that something's wrong with me, and I need God to fix it. So these are things that formed my way of viewing religion or faith at the earliest age.
Kurt, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Before we get too far into this, in my detailed research about you, I found out some stuff.
Good.
You may in one of your internet statements, you said that you were born into social work.
Yeah.
I want to go further with this line, later on, but right now, you're born into social work. Your family were doing good things. They were doing really good work with people, with women who, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the quote, but specifically with women. Mm-hmm. How did that affect what you did later on? Because you're still doing that. Okay, go.
Yeah. Well, I would say that another aspect of my understanding of faith, as I was being brought up in it, was that service to the world, service to those who were marginalized, was a really foundational premise. And so my parents were group home managers for a foundation in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where I grew up. These were ladies with developmental disabilities, various kinds. And so it was a group home to teach them kind of basic independent living skills. But that they were doing that before I was born, and they were doing that after I left for college. So yeah, I grew up in that environment. Now, one thing, and I'll probably unpack this a little bit more later on in terms of some things that were very harmful, was that another aspect that I felt, and I felt it at the youngest age, and it just honestly just continued to grow, was this tremendous sense of responsibility. That eternal consequences were associated with my life and how I used it for other people. And so there are some aspects of my childhood and growing up in that context that I consider valuable and honorable even. But there was also some aspects of it that turned out to be incredibly toxic and will eventually kind of speak into my journey of leaving religion.
So what led you into ministry? I'm sure with your parents being heavily involved, they probably really, did they have a big opinion about?
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say that was their secular job. They worked for technically a secular foundation, but they brought a lot of their religion into it, honestly, in ways that they would never get away with now. Never. You run a group home for people, you can't require that everybody get in the car and go to church on Sunday. We did.
That's what killed Teen Challenge in Toronto. Same idea.
It's just like, that's what they did. So, but I think that to speak to some of the elements I've already highlighted, you got to put these concepts together. I'm brought up to believe there's something horribly wrong with me. I need somebody to die for me. And there's, even after that, even when I give myself to this person, to this God, I'm still incredibly, by nature, I've got things that are horribly wrong with me that I need to be disciplined. I need to reject myself So all of these aspects of things that might have come up naturally as a child, when you're exploring life, right? You want to explore life. You want to figure out, what's this all about? What's that all about? And then maybe somehow there's something in that that quickens a passion, and it matches all the gifts that you have, and you pursue it and you give your life to it in some way. That's kind of the natural way. But to me, it was like my desires were always suspect. My
Mm.
it was I'm supposed to die to self, right? I'm supposed to live
Yeah.
to Christ. I'm supposed to die to myself. And I just got a sense and you remember, like, oh, so I'm born in 1974, so I'm 46 years old, born in 74. I'm growing up in really like the heyday of purity culture
Yes.
in the US. I'll speak to the US context. I'm sure similar in Canada. And so I'm paranoid of myself getting in the way of everything from, relationships and I remember, and I think you might recall, I shared at the very first time, the kind of the large group when we were just introducing ourselves, there were some things that I was very passionate about. I loved music. I got a scholarship. I was originally going to go to school down in Southern California, Azusa Pacific University. They had at least at that time, they still had a pretty good music program. So I was still going to go to a Christian liberal arts school, because you don't want to go to a secular school. Like that's where they turn you into a Satan worshiper. So I was going to go to a Christian private school, but I knew, like, my senior year, and I think that there was a lot of psychological, traumas, honestly, that were compounding over time. And I had what I felt at the time was a really profound experience. I remember it was a youth. It was like a countywide youth meeting where all these youth groups were getting together, and there was a fiery preacher there that talked about the halls of hell being aligned, or being the walls in hell being covered with like the wanted posters that you would think of like in the Old West, when it was like, hey, this bandit is wanted, for this. And in hell, there's these posters for people that Satan really is afraid of, because these people are going to change the world, right? Because they're going to give their life to Jesus. And kind of in the evangelical culture, there was like a wink and a nod. We all kind of knew that, yeah, you could go on and do other things, but if you really wanted to follow Jesus, you really wanted to make a difference, you would go into ministry. You would usually do one of three things. You either go and be a missionary, or you'd be a youth pastor, or you graduate to the big leagues and you'd be like a senior pastor. And it's like, those were the things.
Yep.
And so it's the combination of feeling insecure in my relationship to my parents, to my family, to my faith community, because I was grown up in this environment where I'm doubting myself all the time. I want to be secure in that. I want to make them happy. And so, a lot of people will say, there's typical responses to complex trauma. And what I view the journey that I went through as a child was being repeatedly exposed to trauma.
Absolutely.
Some of that trauma was in the form of just toxic theology being drilled into me. And I probably won't share too much about this. I mean, there's some aspects of my life I'm just not quite ready to share all the intimate details about. But there was also a lot of confusion in my childhood, because there was an incident of sexual abuse from my father, and who was considered, he was a deacon in the church.
Mm-hmm.
He was, and my mom played the piano and the organ, a lot of music in my family.
That must have been hard. That must have been such a. That must just. I'm just listening, and I'm almost speechless, Kirt. You're making such good points. That level of indoctrination, it definitely will cause complex trauma, and I can hear it. And so, I used to be a youth pastor as well, and I can so relate to having those services where we would whip up the kids with such fiery emotion and passion, and they would dedicate their lives to Jesus, and I would, people would prophesy, you're going to be this and you're going to be that. And if you've been raised and conditioned to believe that that's your highest purpose in life, that's hard to overcome. And
Yeah,
then if
what
you
adolescent
get it
doesn't want to know that and have
exactly.
clarity on that and to pursue that with all that they have? And like and it's interesting, I almost feel like this is a little bit like show and tell. Like I brought like it's like here's a Bible I used to preach from. Here's the Bible I had when I was in high school. And I found this section because I don't know, I mean, like I wrote a lot, like in my Bibles and the pages and I found this. This is from July 22nd, 1991. So I would have been like a sophomore, junior, or on my way to my junior year in high school.
Yeah.
And I said this. I wrote, I even recognized this at that age. I said, I sacrificed my youth when I opened my eyes, my heart, my mind to what was happening around me in the world. And so I went on and I wrote about like how I willingly, like I felt like it was my responsibility to sacrifice my childhood.
Yes. Yeah.
Like one of the most precious gifts that you can give to a human being growing up in their life is this period of time where they're really just exploring. And I gave that up. Some of people who are close to me know that one of my favorite movies is a movie that came out a number of years ago called The Truman Show with Jim Carrey in it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that movie is like probably the closest analogy it feels analogous to my life in many ways. If you're familiar with this story, he's literally was born and he doesn't know it. He's an actor in this gigantic studio, Jim Carrey's character, Truman Burbank. And his whole life is being recorded. Everybody else around him is actors. None of them are real. So his parents aren't real, but it's all like there's a reality television show. And there's this scene where it's like a montage looking at like moments in his childhood. And there's a scene where he's in class and he says, they're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And this young version of Truman says, I want to be like Magellan and I want to explore. And the teacher says, and she whips down this map and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. And that is in essence what happened to me as a child, being indoctrinated into the toxic theology that was. It completely shut down my eyes from seeing a world and a universe that was out there and just narrowly focused on this one, sole, very practical, simple way that I could serve God and serve the church. So anyway, that's a really long way of coming back to Ashley, your question. I had this experience my senior year in high school. So that's when I said, I'm going to put that aside, like music, I'm going to put it aside. I shared the other story when I was a freshman in high school. I made the basketball team and I was so proud of it. I loved sports. I don't know if I would have been good enough to play professionally, but I definitely would have played in college and other things, loved basketball. And I quit the team to join an evangelism explosion program because I felt that was what was going to be most meaningful to God, also meaningful to my parents, meaningful to my church. So I started setting aside these passions of my life. And instead I said, okay, I'm going to go off into ministry. I'm going to be a pastor. And that's what I did. Eventually I left the Bay Area. I went on to study at a Bible college up in Portland, Oregon called Multnomah Bible College. At the time now Multnomah University. Best way to describe that, it used to be called the Moody of the West. So if you're familiar with the Bible Institute, again, with the rise of fundamentalism and reacting and rejecting like the Harvards, the Princetons, those other schools, all these fundamentalists started their own schools. They started, Bible Institute of Los Angeles, Biola. They started Wheaton. They started Dallas Theological Seminary. The cemetery. That's probably, it's more accurate, but seminary. And so I went to.
We had our own too in our denomination.
Yeah, exactly. So that started my journey in ministry. That I went from there, and yeah, I don't know. I could share more.
So this was like, so in your senior year, you had this experience in youth group, you said, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you knew senior year that you wanted to go into ministry, and then you pursued that directly out of high school.
Yeah,
And
I ended up taking like a year off just because I was tired of school. And so I took a year off, and then I went off to so I worked at a Denny's graveyard shift and all kinds of, but and then I went off and I spent the next 4 years at Bible college. I would come back to the Bay Area. I thought I was going to take a year off and then go to seminary, but that year off, I ended up starting serving with a church as a youth pastor, and it was part time. Most of my experiences is in small churches. Some people have experiences in mega churches. That was not my experience. And that's the majority of churches in America are small churches. So I ended up serving as a youth pastor there while also teaching part-time Bible and theology at a Christian private school for junior high and high school. I did that for 4 years leading up to 9/11, which gets into a whole other chapter of my life.
so,
Okay.
oh, go ahead,
Two
Dwayne.
people have a question. I'm just curious about, and I don't want to harp on this, but growing up in a house that helped other people. I want to go somewhere else with this later, but right now, how can you express how did that affect you in what you chose to do in life?
Yeah, I think it affected me because it gave me the only way that seemed possible to help people was you have to do this, you have to go and do this kind of thing. Now, I'll tell you right now, a big part of my journey that I'm in right now is really reconsidering and looking at other ways that I can do. I can serve. I don't like other ways that I can be myself in this one life that I have for the remainder of years of however many years I have. That
You can
does
say
give
serve,
something.
Kurt. It's okay.
That does give something to the world, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be social work. Like it's the same way it does, ministry or social work. It doesn't have to be that. I've actually got a lot of artistic passions, and so there's areas that I want to express myself there. There's things that I'm exploring, but I think in many ways, Dwayne, to answer your question, it limited my perspective of like, this is how I can serve God. And that's what characterized most of my life. It's like, I have to do this. I have to sacrifice and give myself to these pursuits. And that's not to say anything negative about these kinds of work that I've been involved in, but it's not for everybody. And it doesn't have to be for everybody. There's a diverse world. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You see, serving, you're reluctant to use the word serve, but military members use the word serve because they're serving their country. Whatever. So service isn't a bad thing, but growing up that way, that's probably a positive. I see by looking into you, like you're still doing it. You're still doing exactly the same thing. You're helping other people.
Yeah.
That is a pretty good takeaway from having been indoctrinated so young and coming up. I think that's a positive. But everybody does not have to do it. You're absolutely right about that.
You're right. There's the reality of life is when you string a journey together, even when some of the reasons for choosing certain points along the way, if you are growing and evolving, you are going to find aspects of that journey, even if it wasn't like the ideal way that you should have gone, you should have, would have. Listen, and we'll talk probably more about this, but yes, I did eventually pivot in ministry and ended up being very involved in really the evangelical social justice, social work world, and specifically working with refugees. I spent probably the bulk of the last decade working predominantly with refugees. It took me to places in the world that I didn't think I would go, experiences that have been formational. So you're right, Dwayne, there's aspects of my childhood, of that experience, of moving on, certain aspects of ministry. There's certain moments and things that I've been able to be a part of that I do take some pride in, that it's like this did accomplish some good things. It helped people in a tangible way. But
and you're still doing it.
Yeah, I'm still doing it. And imagine that. You can do it without having all of this other bullshit attached to it. And
I did the same thing. I grew up without any indoctrination. I hired 48 Iranian refugees in my business once. Most of them were legitimate too. And the desire to help has to be the genuine foundation of anybody who goes into ministry. Where that desire comes from, however, that's another thing.
Well, that's a big thing. There's a lot of, I think that's where there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of trauma there, at least in my childhood, that it was pretty formational to the first half of my life ish. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to completely skip over that, because what you said about your childhood, it was really heavy stuff, that you had a lot of trauma and a lot of indoctrination growing up, and on top of it, pushing you to be a servant of Christ too, or teaching that to you. Maybe I shouldn't use the word push, but
no, I'd say push. Push
okay,
works.
push.
Honestly, push works. I would say that people who are who've done deep dive in their own kind of therapy and looking at and recovering from things, I would say that the last thought I wanted to say, particularly as it relates to childhood, they'll tell you that one of the most important things that you need to accomplish as a parent, and I'm a parent, I've got two girls, 12 and 7, and I take this very seriously, more seriously now than ever, is attunement. The sense of really getting an emotional, your child feels a sense that you as a parent are tuned to them. And a lot of people, I know there might be some people who will watch this and they will think, how could you be saying these things about your parents, Kirt? Like, your parents were amazing. They were known in their own circles. A lot of people maybe will remember the name or know the person Johnny Erickson Tata, who was very involved in. She knew my parents. She wrote letters. Both my parents passed, expressing condolences. There was a lot of almost a reputation that built around that. But it was this weird environment where I could tell that my parents, and I would say particularly my mom, obviously things are incredibly complicated. Actually, they're complicated, and in other ways not complicated with my father. But with my mom, like, there was ways in which I think she was trying to be a mom. Like, she was trying to emotionally connect with her youngest son. I have an older brother. But at the end of the day, it was always about but God's will needs to be done. So whatever you might be feeling, or questions that you might be having, or doubts that you might be having, those all need to be overcome by faith. Yeah. And I think that just has an incredibly toxic effect ultimately on a child that can have an impact on the course of their life, the rest of their life as an adult. Yeah. So
absolutely.
And because in some ways it's almost like brushing some things under the rug.
It is.
Yeah.
It's telling me that these parts of me that are questioning or that want to express myself in other ways, want to pursue. I mean, we'll talk, I'm hoping, a little bit more about this in terms of relationships and sexuality. That those are just bad. They're bad. They need to be suppressed.
Yeah.
If they're suppressed, and then you just, and I think what that happens is it just sets people up for a tremendous, they start making their own decisions. And some of them, including some decisions I've made, ended up being very destructive to myself and hurtful to other relationships. But I feel like a lot of it comes back to some of these origins of this trauma that I was.
That's true in all religions, that have extreme elements. Now, if you were in a church that was born again, you are an extremist. Okay, you're every bit as extreme as an ultra Orthodox Jew or ultra extremist Muslim. When you take the religious beliefs to the absolute extremes, you are an extremist. It doesn't matter who you are. So I label myself as an extremist, and that is going to take a lot away from the value of the child. And as an adult, you know what? It's going to affect you. You're also you did something with a sneaky or snarky faith, and the title of it was Recovering Evangelical.
Yeah.
I think that's very apt.
No, it is. I need to. I'll say this point blank. I have no hesitation saying this. Evangelical Christianity, and I'm going to focus on that. That's where I came from. So that's what I can. But no, evangelical Christianity is 100% a cult. It is a cult.
Yeah.
It's just a
100%.
mainline,
It is.
socially acceptable cult, but it is a cult. It
Yes.
has all of the hallmarks of it, and I'm still facing the struggles of that even now as a parent, as a divorced parent, working with, and I'm trying to do this as positively as I can with my ex, who's still very much in that and wants, so there's dueling influences here. But I look at that, especially now looking at it from the standpoint of the development of my own children, and it is 100% a cult.
Yeah.
It's
If
Preach
anybody-
it. I want to say amen,
If
but that
anybody-
wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah.
If anybody is watching and you're wondering if your church is a cult, this is a great on your screen now is a great website to go to for the bite model, which will give you a checklist to see how close you are to being in a cult.
Yeah.
It's
Wow, I've
quite
never been to that
eye-opening.
website. I need to check that out.
I
very
actually
eye-opening.
believe odd, but there was a website I subscribed to as a believer, and the guy was a former Garner Ted Armstrong Worldwide Church of God guy, and he had converted to regular Christianity. Anyway, he published a list, a checklist that your church might be a cult. Excuse me. And I was going to one of the biggest churches in Toronto at the time, as my base, my home base, because I wasn't a pastor there. But I considered that list, and I thought, oh my God, I was still a believer. Okay. I was a minister. I was working all over the world, and I was totally into the faith. And I realized, holy smoke, my church is probably a cult. Unbelievable. 7 out of the top 10 things I could check for sure. The other 3, almost wasn't sure, but dangerous stuff.
Yeah. So Kirt, I'm finding your story to be fascinating, by the way. Tell me, so you mentioned about toxic doctrines earlier. What would you say would be some of them? I mean, other than you went into the purity culture. Was there more?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, I wouldn't mind unpacking that a little bit more, because that has had a major, and it's been really eye-opening and sobering for me to hear more of the stories around purity culture from the perspective of women who grew up in it. And so I want to just begin with recognizing that I think the extremes and the trauma that was particularly came upon young girls and in that age as a result of this concept of purity culture was incredibly harmful. But I also feel like I can speak to the aspects in which it was also harmful for me as a young man. What did I know? I knew that I wasn't permitted to date until I was 16. That was just like rule number 1. Like you cannot date till then. And I was, but I'm kind of have a romantic side to me. And like, I was growing up, and like, I can remember like my first, I remember this gal Rosanna, like in the 5th grade, and I brought her flowers, and I just like those, and I had these feelings, I had these emotions as I was just naturally developing, but I felt like I can't talk about these. And it's interesting because I know that we've talked at times, like we had an episode on like the no true Scotsman kind of myth. And I know that at times a lot of people will say, and I've had it said directly to me, oh, the reason why you're not a Christian anymore is because the church, and they're saying the church that's been corrupted, or it's not the real church, hurt you. And as a result, that's what you left away. One, I object to that premise. No, it was the real church. It was the real church based on real doctrines of centuries established, tradition and practice. You can't just wash it away as like this being an anomaly or twisting of the faith. It's like, no, this is deeply embedded in your sacred texts all the way through for centuries. You cannot just explain this away that way. But there was a sense in which I I couldn't be who I was becoming as a young man. I remember this, here's my 1987 junior high yearbook, and I remember I had this crush on this girl Tracy, and I put a heart around her picture in my yearbook. And then my parents found read the yearbook, and they found that. And I remember feeling such shame about having those feelings at that age that I blamed it on a friend of mine. Sorry, Dale, if he's watching this, a friend of mine still is good. I blamed it on a friend of mine that he's like, it was a prank. He was like, oh, like a, and then I scratched out the heart around her, and I so already there's this effect of like, okay, understanding sexuality and romance and relationships and growing up. Like, if it doesn't fit into this biblical template, then it's harmful, and you have to run away from it. And the reason why I'm saying this is because certainly there are many aspects that I could talk about as reasons why I would ultimately leave Christianity. Some of them are rational. So, for example, the Bible is not the inspired, inerrant word of God. It's full of countless errors. It is riddled with, it's obviously a sociological, ancient religious text that is developing over hundreds of years and changing its theology as it goes. So I know we've talked a lot about the doctrine of hell. Like, it's developed, it's changed over time.
Yeah.
And or, you know, even the doctrine aspect of a unitary God has grown. It's changed over time. You know, they'll say, oh, this is progressive revelation. Bullshit. This is just of an ancient religion spawned for all kinds of psychological reasons and political motives and a whole complex number of reasons for that, changing over time. Like, I could go into all of that, but there's also elements, practical elements of theology as applied from understanding religious texts that are incredibly harmful to life, to our lives. And one of those areas was my understanding of how would I find somebody who I could be a partner with for the rest of my life. And it was so reductionistic. It was so simple. I feel like I was set up for failure.
Yeah.
And I understand.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's yeah.
That's
the whole doctrine of we are born sin and we can't ever do anything right and we need Jesus. Well, of course, the whole damn thing is setting us up for failure.
Yeah.
And you said before something about the church hurting. I think the church has hurt everybody. I mean, I guess I'm talking about the serious, the extreme churches, the born again churches. I don't know if the mainline churches that are liberal, I don't know if they hurt anybody. They just give something to do on a Sunday, maybe, I don't know. But I think that the serious churches, yes, absolutely, they hurt everybody. Some people don't know that they're injured.
Well, I do think that, so for example, I think that I can say that the reasons why I left religion are both reason-based. So I've learned, I've grown, I've understood more of science and nature and history and those things, and it's undermined over time, slowly chipped away at these things that I was taught just to assume were true. But I would also say it is fair to say that I did leave the church because the church hurt me or because Christianity hurt me. Yes, it hurt me too. You can't apply these kind of toxic theological concepts to daily life and not end up causing a tremendous amount of trauma and pain in people's lives. So I left religion ultimately for those. And I would say that, so the reasons why, I remember growing up a lot and hearing a lot about the promises of God, right? You just need to base your life on the promises of God, the principles of God's word and the promises of God. And if you do, you can't go wrong. Now, of course, if you suffer for that, then this is where Christianity, and this is probably true of a number of major exclusive worldwide religions, they have a brilliant get out of free jail card. They really do have an amazing way set up so that no matter what happens, they can always say that it's your fault.
Yeah.
So it's like if you, or you just, if you're suffering and you die for Jesus, then, that's glory.
Yeah,
But,
that's right.
but if you're suffering, then, you sinned, somebody else sinned, society sinned, all these kind of things. And so I think that one of the reasons why I left ultimately is the promises of God, the principles of God's word were an utter disaster in my personal life. It led me down the wrong road professionally because and it led me down the wrong road personally in my relationship. I grieve for that. I actually have. I feel bad at times. I don't want to spend too much time, but I feel bad at times for my ex because I feel like she was set up to fail as well. Like we were both set up to fail. We were both conditioned to see, right? We're waiting for God to bring that one person along. And then when the circumstances line up just right, it has to be God. And then you get married and then you find out this is not a good match.
Oh God.
So either God
Wow, I'm like really identifying with so much of what you're saying.
Yeah,
I really like how you said how you worded that religion and all of this set you up for failures.
Yeah.
That
either God is a horrible
I mean,
matchmaker. Like God really sucks. Like Match.com. I hope is he running this thing? Whatever he's doing, it's awful. Or the only alternatives that I knew for a long period of time was no. It just meant that we need to suffer. I remember there's reading that it's all about God's. God's more interested in your holiness rather than your happiness. So now I have to choose between my happiness and God's holiness, and it's just like, oh, this is horrible. This damages people so much.
Yes.
And then ultimately we learn to cope with it in certain ways that even add more insult and more pain. So then I made more decisions that caused more pain as a result of these original rooted ideas and concepts that were played out in my life and pushed on me from the earliest age.
You see, Kirt, you just had the spirit of confusion. Oh boy, I couldn't resist. This is so. Can you imagine? Okay, for the people listening, everything that Kirt has said. Okay, and Kirt, you can listen to. This is not just for them. But can you imagine going through your entire life struggling with everything like that? You're struggling with every decision you make. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it godly? And you get used to this bullshit.
Yeah.
And this is normal? What?
Yeah. No wonder that I'm 46 years old and I'm tired. I'm tired a lot of the times. And it's just because I'm starting in my own therapy and recovery and realizing this is some of the reasons why.
How old were you when you got out of this nonsense?
So I left. I stopped serving as a pastor in 2016, and then I left. I was at World Relief. We haven't really talked much about that, but this is also honestly gets into another aspect of theology that led to my departure from Christianity, is realizing how violent the God of the Bible is, and so and how I used to paper over that. It's really disturbing to me now to think of the stories, even before I left ministry, that I would tell my children.
Like what?
Were so horribly violent.
Oh, Bible stories?
The Bible, the God of the Bible is a violent, sadistic God.
Vicious.
Yeah. Like Daniel in the Lion's Den, like that's like happy bedtime stories.
So, so here it is. I'll do it quick. So like I said, I was a youth pastor for 4 years in the Bay Area that led up to 9/11. 9/11 happens, a lot of military service in my family. And I made the decision. I said, I think God wants me to serve in the Army. And so I left ministry for a couple of years, formal ministry. I like to think of it that I was just entering into ministry in a different environment.
Wait, how old were you when this was happening?
I was 27 when I entered the Army, so I was a little bit older.
Oh, wow,
So
okay.
I was an old man in basic training in comparison to most of the other who were there. But I did feel very strongly moved by the fact that I think this is what God wanted me to do. I was strongly influenced in this context, and this could be a whole other presentation. We've talked a little bit about this on Christian nationalism, which is heavily influenced and led to the election of Donald Trump and all these other things. I was, this Fox News world view of that we are God's second chosen nation behind Israel. It's like Israel, America.
Wow, isn't that astonishing?
Really?
And I was,
yeah, oh yeah, America somehow. Well, that's listen, Joseph Smith.
No, I mean, if you look at the early concepts,
America first.
Yeah, if you look at the early concept of manifest destiny, which led to the westward expansion across, I mean, it was highly informed by Christian theology, basically embracing America as another manifestation of Israel, and then being given by divine right this ability to take over this entire country, which, by the way, while we commit mass genocide on all the Native American people who live here already, so it justified. So I started to connect the dots and started to see that it's no big surprise that a lot of authoritarian regimes throughout history have utilized Christian theology to justify mass violence in war.
Yes.
And I got suckered into it. And I literally risked my life for it. I came back and I carried caskets of people who died for that vision. I lowered their bodies in the ground. I folded their flags. And but I thought it was like this must have been part of God's will. But I started to see through that experience, even though I left the Army and then I went back into ministry, I started to sense a growing uneasiness with the violence of the God of the Bible. And then I got involved in working with refugees. And you talk about a Bible story, and I'll share this I have a blog. I haven't written in it a long time, but that I was writing.
Yeah, since 2018, just by the way.
I know.
I'm waiting for some updates.
I just need a little break. I wrote a series in that blog on the murderous God. And it was all looking at Bible stories that we tell our children. And it was all taking side by side with clips from the Bible verse, the U versions. What is it? It's their kids' version, the Bible app. And I started to think, and this started to cause a major crisis in my life as I was understanding that God is violent. I was involved in refugee ministry at the apex leading up to the election. I was leading a large an evangelical resettlement agency, we were feeling the pressure at that point in time of the church is rallying behind somebody who's just so belligerent. And I was at the same point in time, I'm trying to think wait a minute, I thought we're supposed to be this. And I remember, many of you will remember that one of the images that catapulted the issue of refugees to front and center was the image of a young Syrian boy named Alan 30, his body being photographed after it washed up on the shore in Syria, in the Mediterranean. And I remembered thinking of that, what it must have been like for this, among thousands and thousands and thousands of other children who drowned to death. And then we tell our kids a story of Noah's Ark that commits this genocide, this murder on a mass scale, and then say it's by the hand of God and we want to worship him?
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me? Who wants to, in their right mind, worship a God who's this sadistic? Even something as simple as the cross. Who wants to worship a God whose only solution to forgiving people is human blood sacrifice?
Yeah.
So wow.
Thank
you for swearing, Kurt. It's about time.
Yeah, it happens on occasion. Sorry.
When
not sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
That's okay. I was just going to say that how did we miss that for so long? Maybe I should say for myself, the story of the flood. It's like you don't. It's like when you're in there, you don't really see the horror of it. But every woman, every pregnant woman, every baby, every person who couldn't walk or couldn't see.
Yeah.
was drowning is a horrible way to die.
Ever think of how many people Samson killed?
Yeah.
Innocent people. With his 30 his wedding party or something. This riddle and 30 pieces of clothing, 30 suits of clothing. Remember that story?
Yeah.
And he goes and kills someone, takes his clothes, kills 30 so he can pay off his gambling debt. What?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Or newsflash,
Mhm.
I'm a balding guy, or pretty much bald guy.
I thought you shaved your head on purpose for style.
If I was a prophet, if I was a prophet and a group of kids started teasing me about my bald head, hey, I could just pray to God, and a little pack of bears will come and tear them to pieces. And this is a childhood Bible story that's apparently good.
Like, you know what, though?
This is insanity.
Don't forget, these stories were told to us as insiders. We were insiders. So these were good stories because we were the good guys. We never considered the fact, oh, wait a second, what makes us good? What makes them bad? As a Christian, as still a believer, I had occasion to live temporarily in the house of just about a month, Jehovah's Witness. Another time, a Muslim couple from Afghanistan. And, the Jehovah's Witness people were interesting and friendly, and they let us in, let me into the house. But the Muslim couple, they were absolutely saintly. And these are supposed to go to hell. What?
Yeah, no, I know.
They were amazing.
No, I mean, I worked for, like I said, an evangelical resettlement agency. Specifically, I've done a lot of work with Afghans. Sacramento is the home of the largest Afghan community in the U.S. of all the recent refugees who've come over, and so thousands of people, and they were like beautiful in their love that they were expressing, their hospitality towards me, and yet I'm also kind of, not officially because we're publicly funded, that gets in a whole another ball of wax, mobilizing evangelical churches to welcome them, but largely was so that we could be in close contact with them and ultimately, hopefully, at an appropriate time, win them to Jesus so they won't go and burn in hell. And you're right. There's so many contradictions in the experience. People who show great love and compassion breaks outside of the theological othering, which is in essence, that's something that all major exclusive dogmatic religions do. They other people.
Yeah, that's good.
And in the end, it hits and it manifests itself ultimately in national conflicts and regional conflicts and all kinds of things. And a lot of it's rooted back to the religious nature of the necessary impact that any exclusive religion will have on othering people.
Yeah. Kirt, I'm interested in how long it took you to work through these things. Like how long was your deconstruction process?
Yeah, I would say that my personal life, like I said, a lot of things, the promises were not panning out.
Right.
And
that's an interesting point too. And I don't want to skip over it. And listen, if we go over time, don't worry about it.
Okay.
But the failed promises of God, when you're a Christian, you really think that everything good that happens is, the fulfillment of a God promise. But when things don't go well, it's all your fault. It's definitely not God's. So it puts you in a position where, your victories all are not yours, but your shortcomings are front and center all the time. So you get where you're nothing but crap, and everything good is God. So, people.
I would say that
realize that.
I would say that by probably around actually probably about 8 or 9 years ago was when I really started to just give up on certain aspects of the personal promises, the principles, the life that I thought I was going to be experiencing, particularly in my marriage. And okay, hold on for 1 second. This is going to be unique, but I have to do it because I'm the owner of a cat, and if I don't let him in, he was just going to get really angry at me. And I will say right off the bat, people who know me will know Ginger, my cat. I'm giving a shout out to my cat here on this podcast.
Shout out to Ginger.
He has been a part of my recovery, so I'm very grateful for that.
Aw, animals are the best.
My furry friend, my tabby cat, who's just saved my life. Of course, so he has to be front and center and say hi. I respect it. People who know, Ginger is just like one of the greatest cats of all time. But
cats are really great.
Yeah.
Cats are so good. I drive a Jaguar. Hey, like that.
Yeah, there we go. But I would say it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago that I was just giving up on that aspect of it. I would also notice that I was never even. I remember feeling guilty about this throughout my childhood and even into ministry. I was never much of an evangelist. So I feel like there was something in me that was still like not fully given to this, and just felt bad about the concept of going out and other people got so into it. They would like rack up, win emos, rack up salvations for Jesus like ticks on the nose of a World War II bomber.
I know what you mean. It's like awkward. It's so awkward.
Numbers, right? Like the Billy Graham Association did this for. It was almost like the number of burgers that were served at McDonald's, like 1 billion served, or how many people have gone to Disneyland, or whatever. It's like, how many people have we saved? They would talk about that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
I never really got. There was something in there, and also, and listen, I preached the Bible. I preached my first sermon on a youth Sunday at age 18. And I preached my last message in a church. I think it was like it was almost 25 years. I never preached that often about hell, or rarely. And if it did, it was just almost in passing. Something about it just did not sit right with me ever. So I think that I was starting to, even though, so I went from like ardent conservative evangelical, then I was sliding and becoming more and more of this like liberal progressive Christian. And that started probably 8 or 9 years ago. Then in my personal life, it honestly became a wreck just because I was pretty miserable where I was at. And I made some bad decisions, a number of bad decisions there that caused more hurt. So I think it was like the combination of those things. And then certainly over the last couple of years of ministry, when the lead up to the election, I think that surfaced a lot of the aspect of the violent nature of Christianity, inherently violent. Say again?
The 2016
election, and then that eventually I left. So I stopped attending the church at the end of 2017. That's when I left World Relief, and I've only gone, I think, to like 2 services since then. One was to, and both of them have been to a couple of liberal mainline churches where I knew I had friends that went there, and I wanted to go and support them. And actually, one of them is led by a gay pastor, and I have several good friends.
Kind of an
I have several good friends who are kind of part of the liberal Protestant traditions. I love them. I disagree with them, but I love them. I see a lot of where their heart is at times. I feel the conflict of where they're at and the questions that they're wrestling. Yeah.
You mean that church? You mean the
because
church?
of how liberal?
These friends that I have that are still involved in kind of more liberal, what we would say we would call progressive, liberal mainline Christianity. I think that a lot of them are struggling with a lot of the same questions that I have, but it's their own journey, and they're not where I'm at, and I'm not going to try to impose that on them. But and then since the end of 2017, in answer to your question, Catherine, I've really been investing. I've invested a lot in myself. Imagine that. Is that okay? It's not selfish. It's not sinful. I matter.
At 47, go for it.
Yeah, like you said, this story about me is all about leaving God and finding myself. And I'm finding myself. I've invested. I have a great therapist. Thank you, Michael. And I have some wonderful people in my life who have helped me in my journey of recovering from religion and starting to piece back the real me. And I'm grateful for them. And I've been on that journey really pretty actively, especially since I left the church last 3-4 years or so.
That's awesome. So you left 3 or 4 years ago, like 4 years ago or so you
Yeah, I
said,
started
but
attending church
you
the end of
started
2017, so 18, 19, 20, 21, so almost a little over 4 years ago.
okay, so if my math is right here, you actually left like 4
Mhm.
years ago, but you started deconstructing, you said 8 or 9 years ago, so you
I
deconstructed
do.
for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think while I wasn't necessarily, making the determination, oh,
Yeah.
there is no God, or Jesus, there wasn't some aspect of Jesus that was divine or whatever. I hadn't made those conclusions, but I would say that there was definitely things that were starting to chip away, and I was tossing those. So it's like deconstruction was happening long before I even was familiar with the
Yeah.
word or the concept.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about your life now, finding yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what's that like? What have you discovered? What's new? Like, who's Kirt?
Who's Kurt
Mhm.
now? I love myself in this.
Yay!
Yeah. Um, and the things that I'm learning about myself, I'm finding a lot of compassion for the parts of me that were hurt, misguided, made a lot of decisions that compounded the trauma that I had already been exposed to. Um, but no, who am I now? I'm finding I'm very creative. I still love to share. I love to help people. I love being a parent to these two amazing girls. My oldest daughter, who came out earlier this year, tremendously proud of her. But
Yay.
both of them, I just finished spending the weekend with them. I love them dearly. Yeah, they've got amazing amounts of courage and skill. So I love that aspect about it. I'm still very much involved in social work. I do think that I'm going to pivot at some point towards other ways that I hope will benefit humanity. I'm kind of skeptical about humanity right now. I don't think we're doing too
Yeah.
good. I'm not very, but I'm hanging in there. I'm still going to uh, do right by them by doing right by me. And so, yeah, my daily, life exists a lot of, also investing in me. I've read dozens and dozens of books over the last couple of years, a lot focused on trauma, a lot on recovery. And I'm looking forward to, I've got some passion projects of me. I'm a part, as I think a number of us are all of us part of the clergy project, or a number of us.
No.
I
Um,
am.
so,
I think, yeah, we
Oh,
all
all
are.
four of us are. Yeah, all
Yeah,
four.
we all
Yeah,
are.
we are.
yeah, so that
Yeah.
other connected with other professional therapists who I'm incredibly thankful for. There's a whole burgeoning field of recovering from religious trauma right now.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about that. I have some vision around some greater support for people who are leaving, like all of us. And I think that's what this, like unordained, this is part of that. This is a tool that's helping and supporting, hopefully will help and support others many of them who are still in the cult. And I mean, that's my number one advice. It's kind of like, it's the movie a couple of years ago, Get Out, right? Just when you find a way and connect with people like us, and we want to help and stand with you, but find a way to get out. It is a cult, and it's going to destroy your life and life of your families and your communities. So those are the things I'm kind of passionate about. And then aside from that, I can still be kind of goofy. I still love other things in life. I watch way too much Seinfeld still.
Love Seinfeld.
Yeah, there's those aspects of me that
Interesting.
I like enjoying. I love nature.
Yeah.
I'm just rediscovering a whole new passion for the physical world around us and the curiosity. So I'm trying to
Oh,
give
yeah, I
myself
can
as much
relate.
to that, to the preservation of nature. So environmentalism is something that's very important to me as well now. I mean, this is just kind of a snapshot of a number of aspects of who I am and what I'm passionate about and hope to do for as long as I have breath.
That is amazing. I want to cap what I was asking before. I asked you about growing up in a home that helped people. And in 1978, I was already in Bible college for a while and was attending a church, and the pastor there brought up a question in his Sunday morning message. He talked about ministers who were rich. There's always been rich ministers, and I always wanted to be one. Didn't happen. But
Me too.
he
I never
answered
was
his question.
No, it wasn't
in his
one.
message. Yeah. More offerings, please. But he said, these people who have big ministries they would have been rich anyway. If they didn't go into ministry, they would still be rich because they understood the way business worked. They understood, they had it in them, in the nature. And I've had a lot of years to think about that, a little more than 4 decades. Okay, think about that. And I realized that, there are people who are Christians and they're genuinely good people. And I have come to realize that they don't need this imaginary Jesus in order to be a good person. You don't need this God thing to be a good person. You're either a good person or you're not. Because if you don't believe me, think about how many absolute jackass morons are Christians, and they claim to be a total adherence to the Lord, whatever, and they're just not making it. They're horrible, horrible people. And yet there's some people in the church that are wonderful. They would be that way regardless.
Yeah, most people, most, I won't say all, but most people, I think they do. They have these good qualities about them, these areas of them that haven't been tarnished and hurt, and trauma, received trauma that's led to the other aspects of their life, and they're trying to do their best. And there's a lot of people who are a part of religion who are just doing so because of cultural reasons. It's just what they were born with, what they grew up with. And I'm just hoping that more and more people will realize a lot of what you're sharing, Derek, and that there's other things that honestly we can give. I think of the billions of dollars that are given to the church to do very little. And I could call myself an expert on Christian social and social justice. Okay. I was involved, on just candidly, we could be using our money a lot better. Not only what we directly give to the church, but what we also benefit the church by withholding taxes from them, which don't get me on that soapbox as well, because I'm a big advocate of taxing the churches. They should be audited more often, I think, in my opinion, for all the benefits that they get from public dollars here. Let's see, at least in the U.S.
$600,000 hidden in the wall of Joel Osteen's bathroom.
Yeah, I read about that. That was crazy.
And I was actually offered a job. Well, I was offered a job in Trinidad, and I was offered a job in
Trinidad.
Oh, cool! I used to go there a lot. And I was also offered a job in Richmond, Virginia, and so I did a comparison of pastoral salaries. And I found out that if you are a pastor with X number of people, your salary should be about $140,000 a year. Wow, that's pretty good. I mean, this was like 15, 20 years ago. That's pretty good. Jeez. Yeah. So how much, I did some math. $600,000 Joel Osteen's church was supposed to be one weekend's offering. So that means this. If every single person that showed up at that church today is less than 18,000, let's round it off to 18. Okay, it's 18,000 people that show up. Each person gets $35. That's all it took, and that's how. And $600,000. Wow. So we're giving a lot of money to these places. Don't get me started on his Ferrari. Yeah. Did you know that Joel Osteen supposedly has a Ferrari? It's for the Lord, though, so it's got to be all right.
Spiritual version of professional athletes.
Exactly.
So there's a lot.
There's an awful lot of money directed, and the one thing a lot of people that I've been conversed with in the clergy, ex-evangelicals, one thing that I have in common is none of us were in it for the money. None of us were in it for the glory. We were in it for the heart in the right place. And guess what? After we're out of ministry, we're still doing it for the right reasons. We're still doing good things for people. So what the hell does God have to do with this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mic drop.
Great point.
All right.
Yeah. And we spend all that time and all that money thinking that we're serving a benevolent God, when then we end up finding out he's really actually kind of a monster.
He's a prick.
And not real.
Listen to what George Carlin has to say about him. He was right.
I know we're a little bit over time. I really appreciate you guys letting me have the time to share more of the story. I was just going to say maybe, and I don't know if this is where you were going, Ashley, but just for those who are still, who are still in, or they're in the process of deconstruction. I would just encourage you. I think Kathy spoke a lot to this last week of the bubble of knowledge that she was in. That's a telltale sign of a cult. So as you're deconstructing, just blow up the bubble. Just learn and grow from everything that you possibly can outside of religious. Those that are religiously influenced in particular. Get professional. You're going to need professional help. If you've been involved in this for any length of time, you're going to need professional therapy, not Christian counselors, please, not religious counselors. Get people who, I've particularly benefited from the internal family systems methodology, and there's a lot of other methodologies out there that have been really helpful to people recovering from trauma. So get the help and then connect with people, hopefully like us. I think we're good people that
there's a lot of great books out there, a lot of research, and if the information about your faith is true, then you're going to circle right back to it. But
exactly, that's what I tell you.
You'll circle right back to it.
That's right.
But unfortunately, you end up finding out that you've been duped as well, and that's a really hard realization for people to come to. It's hard to tell people that they've been following something delusional for a long time. That's a really hard realization. And definitely, Kirt, I definitely back up the therapy. Therapy is very important once you get out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Professional secular therapy. And we put up there too, the Secular Therapy Project. And that is as well as recovering from religion. Those are two really great resources. If you have left religion to get support. Secular Therapy Project, you can get therapy through there. And then recovering from religion, I know they have support groups you can join virtually and in person as well. And so there's a lot of great things out there. I encourage you guys to check these out. And to check out any of our past episodes if you have missed those as well. Kirt, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was really great, and I am so happy that you got out of that and that you're continuing to heal and open your eyes and deconstructing from all of that theology.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was great, Kirt. I really appreciated everything you had to say.
Yeah, me too.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well done, Kirt. I didn't even get to pick at all the funny stuff.
Yeah.
Your LinkedIn profile needs, a little bit. Still lists you as pastor.
Who
might have to.
Jeez.
Okay. Well,
welcome to This Is Your Life.
I'll get on there. I've encouraged every aspect of my life here, my religious influence.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you guys have a good night.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.